Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Ask a Property Manager. Today is episode number 44 and the date is October 28th, 2020. I'm coming to you live from Studio 2.0 here at Own Buffalo Inc. I'm Andrew Schultz, principal broker, and on today's show we're going to be talking a little bit about asbestos, and then we're going to be looking at some questions from housing providers around the country. Before we jump into all of that, let's go ahead and plug our social media. New episodes of Ask a Property Manager come out every Wednesday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern, live on our Facebook page. You can find that over at facebook.com/Buffalo Foreclosed Homes. You can also find the replay on our Facebook page as well as over on our YouTube page the same day over at youtube.com/OwnBuffalo. As always, you can check out our Instagram page. We post a little bit of different content over there. Definitely not the same stuff that you'd see on Facebook and on YouTube. And last but not least, don't forget that you can grab a free 30-minute consultation with me over at ownbuffalo.com as well. Looks like I have a couple of time slots available still for this week and some slots open for next week as well. Last but not least, don't forget about the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. New episodes drop every Thursday morning. You can get those anywhere podcasts are heard or over at rentprep.com/podcast. This week's episode, we're going to be taking a look at some positive tenant stories, which is always a nice change of pace. We're also going to be taking a look at renting to tenants with low credit scores, and we're going to be talking about a tenant's rights when you are going to sell a property during a pandemic. A tenant's rights as well as a tenant's concerns during a property sale in the middle of a pandemic. So pretty interesting episode over there this week. Don't miss out. New episodes every Thursday morning over at rentprep.com/podcast or anywhere podcasts are heard. A little bit of humor for you guys this morning before we jump into our first news article. I found this, I believe, on Facebook. I'm not sure which group we were in when I found this, but this is especially relevant during pandemic times when people are trying to figure out their next steps and things like that. Plus, you know, if you're a single guy, you're familiar with handcuffing season, which is upon us. So, you know, that's a little bit of humor for today. We will jump into our first news article. And actually, our news article will lead us into our main topic of the day. Let me just switch screens here. Over to desktop. The Canadian town of Asbestos is changing their name. I honestly never even knew that there was a town called Asbestos. Apparently, this is where a lot of asbestos has been mined out of over the years, and that was kind of how the town got its name originally. This article published by CNN on the 20th of October, so a few days ago. Canadian town of Asbestos chooses new name. We'll go through the article a little bit here. It's been one of the most divisive elections in North America this year, but close to 11 months after the poll was announced and after a shock last-minute change of candidates, the town of Asbestos, Quebec has a new name. Close to half of the town's 6,000 or so residents turned out for a parking lot-based car vote in mid-October, and the new name Val de Sources was revealed Monday. I apologize in advance. I did not take any sort of French language lessons in high school or in college or anything like that. I took some Spanish classes. I can't pronounce French, unfortunately, so you're going to have to deal with my butchering here a little bit more. We'll jump ahead a little bit. Mining history. The city initially grew from the development of an asbestos mine around a large deposit of the substance discovered there in 1897. Makes sense. For decades, the town thrived on asbestos mining and product manufacturing. Asbestos is a naturally occurring but very toxic substance. Once used widely for insulation, it's been banned in Canada since 2018. That'll be relevant to our next discussion here in just a moment. The decision to change the town's name was made in November 2019, as the negative connotations have long been hindering business and tourism endeavors. That makes sense. As citizens are the ambassadors of a municipality and the representatives of its vitality, it was obvious that the public would be involved in the process and the choice of a new name, the mayor at the time said. The original 4 prospects were revealed in September of 2020. I'm not going to try to pronounce these. I don't want to screw them up. Reaction on Facebook, however, was not positive. As a matter of fact, they were ridiculous, as some people in the town had said. We'll scroll forward a little bit. Obviously, they did come up with a new name, a new lineup of 6 names with a decidedly more francophone bent was revealed on October 2nd, and obviously you've got the town names there. Vale de Sources, meaning Valley of the Springs, and referring to the town's location close to the source of Three Lakes, was the clear winner with 51.5% of the vote. The new name was revealed live on Facebook, and this time the response was overwhelmingly positive. Let's see. One of the local residents to the site praised socially distanced car voting system, added, "Thank you for allowing democracy." So very interesting. I never even knew there was a town called Asbestos. Turns out there was one in Quebec, and it's about to get a new name. So good for them. Hopefully it brings a little bit of good fortune in the tourism department and things like that. But that leads me into my main topic for the day, which is going to be asbestos here in the United States. So I was always under the impression that asbestos had been completely banned in the United States and that it just wasn't used in any materials that we are using nowadays. I figured that it's long since been banned, and the health benefits, or I'm sorry, the health impact has widely been reported and discussed and researched and studied. Just seems like this is something that should be banned already. For those not familiar, asbestos exposure can lead to mesothelioma. If you live in the Western New York area, I'm sure you've seen about 1 million mesothelioma commercials on TV. I don't know if that's quite as prevalent in other areas of the country or not. Asbestos was used in a lot of building materials back in the day. Everything from shingling to flooring to popcorn ceilings to, I believe even drop ceiling tiles may have had asbestos in them at some point. And it was used widely, largely because of its fire resistance. It was very fire resistant, it was very heat resistant, which made it a great building material in theory until we discovered all of the negative health impacts that it has. Anyway, we'll jump into this a little bit further here. The U.S. continues to import and use asbestos with no plan for stricter regulations in place. According to a U.S. Geological Survey, 750 metric tons of asbestos were imported in 2018. We now know for certain that all forms of asbestos can cause mesothelioma, a lung cancer, and other chronic respiratory conditions. Obviously, we just discussed that. It wasn't until the early 1970s that government agencies such as OSHA and the US EPA were created to limit exposure to asbestos and other toxic pollutants. Although it's highly regulated in the U.S. today, asbestos continues to be used in hundreds of consumer products as long as it accounts for less than 1% of the product. This article goes on to talk about some of the attempts to ban asbestos. We'll highlight some of the more relevant parts here. Throughout the 70s and 80s, the following legislation was regulating the use of asbestos was implemented, the most relevant of which was the one in 1989, the Asbestos Ban and Phase Out Rule, which planned to impose a full ban on the manufacturing, import, processing, and sale of asbestos. But to date, that was the best piece of legislation that was put forward. Unfortunately, it was short-lived. Moving forward, the EPA has determined that 6 categories of asbestos-containing products fit the classification of, let me jump back in here. Yeah, these are the products that they're determining should not be used for asbestos-containing products. Flooring felt, roll board, commercial paper, corrugated paper, specialty paper, new uses of asbestos, so you're not going to get any new uses of asbestos. Only spray-applied asbestos and these 6 products are banned in the United States. All our other uses of asbestos, such as automotive brake pads, gaskets, roofing products, and fireproof clothing, are still legal. So these are the 6 asbestos-containing products, in addition to spray-applied asbestos, so I would assume for fireproofing purposes. That's the only stuff that's actually banned here in the United States. We'll scroll down a little bit further here. It talks about a couple more bills, and then it starts talking about an outlook for a potential U.S. ban on asbestos moving forward. In 2016, EPA officials took a step in the right direction for a federal ban by adding asbestos to the top 10 chemicals for priority action under the Frank R. Lautenberg Chemical Safety for the 21st Century Act. What a name for an act. Significant new use rule in 2018. The EPA announced a significant new use rule for asbestos on June 1st, 2018. These rules require manufacturers to notify the EPA before chemical substances are used in new ways that might create concerns. Potential new uses for asbestos subject to these rules would be adhesives, arc chutes, beater ad gaskets. You can see there's quite a few different objects here. Roofing felt, vinyl asbestos floor tile. Oh, floor tile. That's something I didn't mention when I was talking about products containing asbestos. There was a lot of floor tile, especially in Western New York. You'll see it a lot in basements that have been finished. the potential for an asbestos tile is greater in those areas, I would say. You can get asbestos tiles tested and things like that to see if they are or are not asbestos. I'm not going to get into all of that. You can certainly talk to an asbestos testing firm for more information there. If you're doing renovation work, in addition to having a lead paint test, if you were doing work on a property that was built before 1978, chances are you're also going to have some asbestos surveying done if you have a property that had asbestos in it, or if suspected asbestos. Your town will walk you through all the guidelines when it comes to that sort of stuff. World powers take action against asbestos. Most notable in this section is the worldwide asbestos bans. I just wanted to point out some of the other countries that have banned asbestos, and I'm sure that the United States will eventually get to the point where it is banned, like just outright banned. We're pretty close now. I don't think it's seeing a whole lot of widespread use, except in a few very specific industries. But there are several countries that have already gone through and banned it. Australia in 2003, the European Union in 2005, the United Kingdom in 2006, Turkey in 2010. Other Middle Eastern countries, including Syria, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, remain reliant on asbestos and are advocates for its use. And obviously in 2018, Canada passed the prohibition of asbestos and products containing asbestos regulations. And obviously here in 2020, Canada's town of Asbestos in Quebec is being renamed. So a little bit of a briefer on asbestos. Honestly, I learned something new in researching this because I thought that asbestos was just flat out banned nationwide. I've obviously now learned that it's not actually banned flat out nationwide. There are a lot of places that it's still being used, which is quite interesting. It'll be interesting to see how things like that develop over time here. And if we continue to use asbestos in any products, or if it just is completely regulated out at some point in the near future. Wouldn't be surprised if it eventually just becomes completely regulated out. So we already saw that. We're going to jump right into our questions from housing providers around the country. And this one is about tenants paying ahead in cash. Saw this on a site in the United Kingdom and thought I would share. Be wary of cash payers. Tenants may often pay or may offer to pay rent upfront for a large period, such as 6+ months. While it may seem appealing and an ideal situation for a landlord, it may often be an evil ploy to disguise sinister activities. Not unheard of for tenants to pay cash up front for a few reasons, but the two most common I've heard about are: one, tenant doesn't want to be disturbed and wants the landlord to stay away from the property because they're harboring illegal activity. Two, the tenants have an awful rental history, so offering a large sum of cash is a diversion. Of course, this may not always be the case, but it is something to be wary about. So this is one that I wanted to bring up because we see a lot of this, especially in Western New York. People will come to us and say, I have security in first month's rent. I'm ready to go. I've got cash in hand. Well, that's great, but it's also a gigantic red flag for me because essentially what you're trying to do is go around our application procedure. And actually, I was doing a rent comp on a property the other day, and I was looking at other rental listings in the area and saw a competitor's listing where they actually specifically state right on their ad that they will not accept. There's no getting around the application procedure. I forget exactly how they had it worded, but essentially they said something along the lines of no same day housing. Everyone must go through the credit and background check. And that's the most important thing that I can bring to light here. So this is a negotiation technique or oftentimes a distraction technique when used by tenants. And the reason I say that is because you'll find that oftentimes, just like this says, they are using this as a way to kind of get around a process or a procedure that they don't want to have to deal with because they won't get through the procedure. You know, it might be a situation where they have something in their background or whatever that would prevent them from meeting the criteria that you would have to meet to rent the apartment. So that's alone is a reason not to rent to them. Like if they're sitting there and they're trying to subvert around at the very beginning of the lease, what do you think they're going to do the entire rest of the time they're living in the apartment? So something to keep in mind. Do not deviate from your screening procedures. Do not fall for these sorts of distraction techniques. Don't deviate from how you normally do things. Be cautious because some states do have laws on how much rent you can accept from someone up front if you get to that stage with these people. But realistically speaking, I think that if you were to tell these people you still have to go through and fill out your rental application, you have to go through the same procedure as everybody else, I bet you that they would probably disappear. because more than likely they're trying to hide something, and that's why they're offering the large sum up front. Landlord registration. Does anyone have insight on a city landlord registry and what that means for a small business or landlord? I have a couple of residents getting assistance, and one of my requirements is to register with this program. Just wondered if this leads to ramifications that are unforeseen. No, we're not slumlords, take very good care of our properties, but we are worried about taxes, etc. We're located in Indianapolis, Indiana. So I'm not sure if this is actually a landlord registration or if it's some sort of a Section 8 registration where they're going to come in and do an inspection. Either way, it's a pretty straightforward thing. It could be good or bad. If it's a landlord registration, so I'm going to talk about landlord registration at a municipal level. It could be good or bad. In some areas, it's literally just a cash grab. They want you to fill out forms and send them $20, and now you have your rental on the rental registry with the municipality. Pure cash grab. And sometimes that's exactly what it is. Other times they will require you, if you are registering as a rental and you don't live in the area, they may require you to register a property manager so they know who your local contact is. And then that way, if there's an issue with the property, usually like the city police department, the city buildings department would have access to this database so that they can look up the information for whoever's managing the property and get in contact with them to let them know that there is an issue that needs to be addressed. So if it's something as simple as you're filling out a form and they're putting your information on file, okay, I don't have a huge issue with that. It's kind of a money grab. Basically, my issue with it is that it's a money grab. I don't have a problem with the city knowing who's responsible for a property. I think that that's, a pretty mild version of a landlord registration. Then you start getting into landlord registrations that require some level of an inspection. And depending on the level of inspection, I could have a problem with it or I could not have a problem with it. If it's, if it's as simple as an inspection where they're coming in and checking for smoke and CO detectors, where they're making sure that the hot water tank is venting out properly, the furnace is venting out properly, basic safety inspection, I don't necessarily have an issue with that. We've had Section 8 inspections in the past that I've had some concerns with, like where they're just nitpicking stuff. And that's kind of where I would draw the line, would be if it's a safety inspection, I don't necessarily have a concern with it other than the fact that it's going to take time out of my day. But I think that there is a certain level of safety that everybody should be required to meet when renting properties. Basic things like smoke and CO detectors, working heat units, things like that. I don't have a concern with that. We had a Section 8 inspection that we failed because there was a 1/4 inch gap between the back cabinet wall and where the pipe would protrude through the wall for the kitchen faucet. And we were cited for that. We failed the inspection because there was a 1/4 inch gap. They wanted the gap sealed up because it could have led to a rodent infestation. And that night, I actually went home and looked under the sink at my house, under my kitchen sink, and realized, oh, I guess my house won't pass a Section 8 inspection because I had a bigger gap than what we had at the rental properties. So sometimes it gets a little bit nitpicky, which is obnoxious. But we have to deal with a lot of regulation in our industry, and this is just one more level of it. So as far as a landlord registration being good or bad, it really depends on what your municipality's take is on it. If they're coming in and demanding a whole bunch of upgrades and stuff like that, I could see where you would have a real concern with it. If it's something where they're just trying to get information so they know who's responsible for the property, I have less of a problem with that as long as it's not a money grab. Either way, if you're running a good property, it shouldn't be an issue anyway. So just take care of your properties and your properties will take care of you. Allowing a tenant to paint. Do you allow a renter to change the paint color in your property? I have a possible renter that would like to change the color of the walls. Thank you in advance. We don't allow tenants to paint. Anytime that we've allowed a tenant to paint, it just seems that paint winds up everywhere. On carpets, on flooring, on woodwork that's, not painted, just all over the place. It's very challenging to find a tenant that will do a good job of painting without making a mess. They do exist, and there are responsible tenants that can certainly handle a paint job, but more likely than not, you're going to wind up with some level of mess or damage as a result. So what we do is we offer painting as an option to tenants. Obviously, we have a unit rent ready when we show it typically. And if a tenant comes in and says, I would really love it if my daughter's bedroom could be pink, Is it possible for us to paint that bedroom pink? Well, no, you can't paint it, but we would be willing to paint it on your behalf. You may want to have a set color scheme that you're willing to operate from. You may want to let a tenant pick whatever color they want. But essentially what we do is when we build out the charge to paint the room, we essentially cover the cost of painting the room twice. Once to paint it to the color that the tenant wants the room, and once to paint it back to the original color once the tenant moves out. We explain that to the tenant up front. We're making this change because you're requesting this change. We have to revert it back to the original way that it was at the end of the lease term. And most tenants are pretty responsive to that. If they really want the room painted, they'll go that route. As long as you're not like overcharging tenants or something like that, I don't see an issue with it. So if they want to have, a very vivid color on their walls and you're willing to do that, but you understand that it's going to take 3 coats of paint to turn it back to Landlord beige or whatever color you have it, just make sure that you're accounting for that in the cost before you give the price to the tenant. So it's a good way to accommodate a tenant if you're in a position where you can do so. Might generate a little bit of revenue on the side for you, and it's a good way to start the relationship off with your tenant on the right foot. We won't necessarily allow them to paint themselves, but we'll paint on their behalf if they're willing to contribute. Small claims court. We have tenants who moved out of our rental in Adams County, Colorado, who say they're going to take us to small claims court for not getting their entire deposit back. We deducted carpet cleaning and other cleaning that is specified in the lease. If you have experience with small claims that you can let us know what to expect, especially during COVID restrictions. So the first thing I would mention is, first and foremost, follow the state guidelines on whatever you have to do to properly dispose of a security deposit. There's generally going to be a time frame. You may have to provide certain paperwork, an itemized list of what repairs were charged against the security deposit. Make sure that you're following that legislation, that law, that time frame, so that you're not getting yourself in hot water. If you mess up those time frames, sometimes the penalties can be 2 times or 3 times the security deposit, which can add up quickly. So just make sure you're following those rules. That being said, experience with small claims court. So the first thing I would say would be relax, because the tenant probably won't even take you to small claims court. Generally what we'll do if a tenant tells us that they want to go to small claims court because they feel that the security deposit deductions are not fair is we'll provide them, before we even go to court, we'll provide them with all of the proof that we have up front. Here's your move-in photos. Here's your move-out photos. These clearly show, a very different looking apartment than when you moved in. The carpets are stained. You didn't clean the kitchen. You left the stove burners, whatever. It shows a clearly different unit from beginning to end. And if that stuff is beyond normal wear and tear, then yeah, there should be charges. Or if you have something in your lease that says that they have to clean the carpets at the end of the tenancy, if they fail to do that and provide proof, then yeah, that sounds to me like something that would be chargeable. And I don't think that anybody would really argue that fact when you get to court. So, I would send the tenant the copy of their lease with the relevant sections highlighted. I would send them a copy of their signed move-in form indicating the condition when they moved in, and I would send the before and after photos. And generally speaking, most tenants will drop the issue right there because they'll either, number one, realize they're in the wrong if they truly are, or number two, they'll realize, okay, we're going to go to court and you're going to have to argue against the case. So a lot of times that's enough to stop a tenant from even going to small claims court. If they do go to small claims court, you already know what your case looks like because you already have your information. So take 3 copies of everything to court, a copy for you, a copy for the judge, and a copy for the tenant, and everything. Make sure you take your lease, your move-in forms, your photos, take all of that stuff in with you, and then just argue your case. The tenant's going to be there. They're going to argue their side. You're going to be able to show your side with factual evidence, photos, and things like that, and then the judge will make a determination. It's not nearly as scary as you would think it would be. We've been through small claims court a few times now. Generally speaking, if you can avoid small claims court, the best way to do it is by providing what you have up front to the tenant and letting them know, look, this is what we know. If you and the other thing is let them know if they have information that would change your mind, send it. Work with them. Be willing to work with a tenant before they even file. The best defense here is a good offense. So the one thing I did not mention that I think is relevant here, definitely double check before you go to court if you have your properties held in a corporation or in an LLC or something like that, sometimes you will not be allowed to self-represent in court for the organization. You'll have to hire an attorney. That's something you'll want to check with the court long before you go so that you can make arrangements for an attorney to be there on your behalf if that's the route that you have to go. Well, that pretty much wraps things up for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. We love producing Ask a Property Manager, and you can help us to improve by dropping a question in the comments, either on Facebook or on YouTube, and your question may be picked up and answered in an upcoming episode. If you enjoyed this content or if we brought some value to your day, please do us a favor and hit that thumbs up button. YouTube and Facebook both push videos based on community feedback, so every like, comment, subscribe, and share helps us to grow and to reach more people. Next week's episode will be live on November 4th. That'll be next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern. We'll be back with another show you won't want to miss. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.